Beneath the surface of history lie secrets buried in shadows, whispers of danger and betrayal, lives lived in silence, and truths too dark to face. As we open this hidden box, prepare to step into a world where every code cracked, every battle fought, and every silent sacrifice carried the weight of a world on the edge of destruction. This is the story you were never meant to hear. In the shadowed heart of Berlin, 1943, as Nazi Germany's grip tightened over Europe, a secret war was being waged far from the battlefields. This was the war of whispers, codes, and shadows, where a small group of young women worked tirelessly behind closed doors in a nondescript government building to crack the encrypted messages flowing through the Axis and Allied networks. These women were not soldiers but codebreakers, recruited from universities and ordinary life, sworn to silence and secrecy. They were the Berlin Cipher. Among them was Greta Mahler, a linguistics student with a sharp mind and a will of iron. Greta had been plucked from a university lecture and brought here under the promise of serving the fatherland in a vital capacity. What she found was a maze of mechanical enigmas, the German military's prized Enigma machines and the Allies' encrypted communications. Her job was to intercept, decode, and analyze enemy messages, a task so vital that it might tip the scales of war itself. But Berlin in 1943 was no place for innocence. The Gestapo was a constant threat, suspicion ran rampant, and betrayal could come from any corner. Greta and her fellow codebreakers, including Anna, a chemistry graduate, and Lisbeth, a former typist, worked in near silence, each keystroke a battle in itself. Their underground office hummed with tension as the air filled with cigarette smoke and whispered conversations about cryptographic theories. The group's breakthrough came unexpectedly. They intercepted fragments of Allied communications that hinted at a massive amphibious invasion on the French coast. Operation Overlord, a plan that would later be known as D-Day. But the messages were scrambled, heavily encoded, and riddled with misleading information planted by Allied intelligence. Decoding these transmissions required not just technical skill but intuition and courage. One evening, as Berlin endured another air raid, Greta stayed behind while others fled to bomb shelters. The war outside mirrored the storm within her. The constant pressure, fear of discovery, and the moral conflict of aiding a regime that committed unimaginable atrocities. Yet, she believed in the importance of her work, not for the Nazis, but for the hope that the war might end sooner, saving millions of lives. Using a combination of intercepted Enigma messages and clever deduction, Greta and her team began piecing together clues about the landing sites and timings. They worked through nights without sleep, driven by a shared resolve. Yet, not all in their circle could be trusted. A double agent lurked, feeding information back to the Gestapo and threatening to unravel their fragile network. The Gestapo's tightening net meant secret meetings had to be moved, contacts changed, and codes altered constantly. In one harrowing incident, Anna was arrested while attempting to pass a decoded message to the Allies via a courier. Her imprisonment sent shockwaves through the team, but also steeled their resolve. Greta vowed to continue their mission, knowing failure meant death or worse. Their efforts culminated just days before the actual invasion. Through painstaking work, the team managed to identify key landing zones on the Normandy coast, the timing of the assault, and even some details about the supporting naval bombardments. They transmitted this information through covert channels to Allied intelligence, a dangerous task fraught with risk but crucial to the operation's success. As June 6, 1944, dawned, the Berlin Cipher women listened anxiously to news reports from the BBC. The invasion had begun. Their intercepted intelligence had helped the Allies prepare and execute the largest seaborne invasion in history. The war was far from over, but this moment marked a turning point. The Allies were finally taking back Europe. But the story of the Berlin Cipher did not end there. In the weeks following D-Day, the Gestapo intensified its hunt for the underground codebreakers. Despite all precautions, they were betrayed by an informant within their ranks. A midnight raid found Greta and several colleagues arrested, their equipment confiscated, their fate uncertain. While imprisoned, Greta kept her silence, protecting her team and the Allies' secrets. Months later, with Berlin collapsing under Allied bombings and Soviet advances, the surviving women were freed by advancing Soviet troops. They returned to a shattered city, their contributions unrecognized by a world more focused on generals and battleships than whispered codes and quiet heroism. Decades later, their story emerged through personal diaries and rare interviews, shedding light on the invisible war fought behind the front lines. The Berlin Cipher's work had shortened the war in Europe, saved countless lives, and proven that courage comes in many forms, not just on the battlefield but also in the silent struggle of minds fighting to crack the codes of death and destruction. Their legacy lives on in the annals of history, a testament to the bravery of those who dared to fight in the shadows when the world was engulfed by fire. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima stood as a fierce sentinel in the Pacific, its blackened sands and jagged cliffs the stage for one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. Official records told a brutal story of fire, smoke, and sacrifice, but buried deep beneath the surface was a chapter seldom spoken of: the fate of the so-called Lost Battalion. The battalion, the 3rd Marine Regiment's 2nd Battalion, was dispatched during the early days of the February 1945 invasion with orders to secure the island's southern beaches and capture critical airfields. Amidst the roar of artillery and the hellish barrage of Japanese defense, this unit found itself cut off from the rest of the American forces after a fierce counterattack that decimated their communications and supply lines. For weeks, the Lost Battalion fought in near isolation, trapped in a labyrinth of volcanic caves and tunnels, cut off from the world above. Supplies ran low, and casualties mounted. But it was not just the Japanese soldiers hunting them, it was the island itself, with scorching heat, choking ash, and poisonous gases seeping through the rocky crevices. Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, a young officer newly promoted after his previous commander's death, took command of the battalion in the chaos. A quiet man from Nebraska, he was not a natural leader in the traditional sense, but his calm demeanor and grit held the remaining Marines together. They scavenged water from underground springs, rationed what little food remained, and fashioned crude weapons from debris. In the darkness of the tunnels, the men whispered stories to keep their spirits alive. Private First Class Daniel Martinez, a Mexican-American sharpshooter, wrote letters in his mind to his wife back home, holding on to the hope of reunion. Corporal Henry Thompson, once a jazz musician, hummed tunes to drown out the sounds of distant gunfire and despair. The battalion was more than soldiers now. They were a brotherhood bound by the will to survive. Meanwhile, above ground, the rest of the 3rd Marine Regiment and supporting naval forces waged a relentless campaign to break Japanese resistance. Intelligence officers believed the Lost Battalion had been annihilated, sending condolences to families and burying their sacrifice in reports filed away and forgotten. But in reality, the men below ground clung to life, adapting to the unforgiving environment and planning an escape. The turning point came when Lieutenant Reynolds discovered a hidden passage leading from their caves toward the island's northeastern edge. It was a desperate gamble. The path was narrow, booby-trapped, and unknown territory. Yet staying meant certain death. With a handful of men, he began the perilous journey, crawling through tunnels barely wide enough to fit, evading Japanese patrols who believed the area cleared. Emerging finally onto the jagged cliffs overlooking the Pacific, the battalion's survivors signaled passing American aircraft using reflected shards of metal and hand-drawn signs. After days of frantic radio calls, a rescue team was dispatched. But the battalion was not simply saved. They brought back critical intelligence on hidden Japanese artillery positions, tunnel networks, and supply routes, information that proved vital to subsequent operations. The Lost Battalion's story was one of grit, endurance, and survival against all odds. Yet it remained largely untold in the years following the war, overshadowed by larger, more celebrated battles and victories. Veterans returned home to quiet towns, haunted by the memories of friends lost in the darkness beneath Iwo Jima, their sacrifices fading into history's margins. It wasn't until decades later, when Japanese veterans of the battle shared their accounts and previously classified documents were declassified, that the tale surfaced in memoirs and local Pacific theater histories. The Lost Battalion became a symbol not only of the brutal conditions faced in the island-hopping campaign, but also of the unseen heroism born from isolation and despair. Jack Reynolds lived to tell the tale, passing away in 1983 surrounded by family and former Marines who had sworn never to forget. In his final years, he worked to establish a memorial at Iwo Jima dedicated to those lost in the forgotten caves, a tribute to brotherhood, survival, and the echoes of a battle beneath the volcanic ash that shaped the Pacific War's outcome. Today, the Lost Battalion stands as a reminder that history is more than battles won or lost on maps. It is the story of men who, when abandoned and outnumbered, refused to surrender. Their echoes still whispered in the winds over Iwo Jima's black sands. Paris, 1942. The City of Light had been dimmed by the heavy hand of Nazi occupation. Streets once filled with laughter and music now echoed with the cautious steps of citizens wary of informants and patrols. Amidst the gray despair, a quiet resistance flickered, a network of underground fighters risking everything to defy their occupiers. Among them was Claire Dubois, a young woman whose life would become intertwined with the shadows of espionage and sacrifice. Claire was barely 20 when the Nazis marched into her city. Born to a schoolteacher and a writer, she grew up with a fierce love for French culture and freedom. When her father was arrested for opposing the Vichy regime, Claire's resolve hardened. She joined the resistance, quickly proving herself as a resourceful courier, ferrying messages and supplies through a city crawling with enemies. Her work brought her into contact with the SOE, the British Special Operations Executive, tasked with coordinating resistance cells across occupied Europe. Under the codename Lumiere, Claire was trained in the arts of sabotage, wireless operation, and clandestine communication. Every mission was a dance with death: evade German patrols, avoid the gaze of the Gestapo, and keep the fragile threads of the network intact. One mission stands out in her memory: the sabotage of a rail yard used to transport troops and weapons to the Eastern Front. Alongside a small group of resistance fighters, Claire planted explosives beneath the tracks under the cover of night. The explosion echoed through the city, a defiant cry against oppression. But the act also invited brutal reprisals. Neighbors were arrested, homes searched, and the resistance hunted relentlessly. Claire's closest ally in the network was Henri Moreau, a former university professor turned saboteur. Together, they navigated the perilous underworld of occupied Paris, using safe houses, secret codes hidden in radio broadcasts, and dead drops disguised as everyday objects. The city's cafes and bookshops became fronts for espionage, the ordinary blending with the extraordinary in a constant masquerade. But trust was a rare commodity. The resistance was infiltrated by collaborators eager to curry favor with the Nazis. One night, during a coded message exchange, Claire sensed danger. Footsteps too close, voices speaking in German. She fled through the narrow alleys, heart pounding, and managed to alert her cell. The betrayal forced the network to scatter, safe houses abandoned, and communications severed. Despite the terror and loss, Claire never wavered. The hope of a free France propelled her forward. She helped coordinate the delivery of Allied supplies, arranged the escape of downed pilots, and passed vital intelligence on German troop movements to London. Each act chipped away at the facade of control the occupiers tried to maintain. As the war dragged on, the resistance grew bolder. The Paris Uprising in August 1944 was the culmination of years of planning, sacrifice, and silent defiance. Claire fought in the streets alongside soldiers and civilians, barricading avenues, and engaging in fierce firefights against retreating German units. The liberation of Paris was a moment of triumph, a light bursting through years of darkness. Yet the victory came at a cost. Friends were lost, families torn apart, and the scars of war lingered long after the guns fell silent. Claire's story, like many in the resistance, was one of quiet heroism, invisible to the history books dominated by generals and politicians but vital to the soul of a nation. Decades later, interviews with surviving members and recovered letters revealed the human side of espionage: the fear, the courage, the bonds forged in secrecy. Claire's tale stands as a testament to those who wore no uniform but fought in the shadows, keeping alive the hope that even in the darkest times, resistance was possible. Paris today remembers its resistance fighters with statues and plaques, but it is stories like Claire's that remind us the true strength of a people lies not only in armies but in the hearts of ordinary individuals willing to risk everything for freedom. In the frozen expanse of the Soviet Arctic, where the polar night blotted out the sun for months and the wind howled like a living beast, a brutal conflict unfolded far from the eyes of most of the world. Operation Frozen Dawn, a lesser-known campaign of the Eastern Front, was a fight not only against Nazi invaders but also against the merciless Arctic environment itself. The port city of Murmansk was the prize, a vital lifeline for the Soviet Union's supply chain, receiving aid and weapons from Allied convoys braving the treacherous Arctic seas. Holding Murmansk meant keeping open a crucial front in the war against Nazi Germany. The German High Command had deployed a formidable force intent on capturing the city, knowing its strategic importance. Among the defenders was a small sniper unit, the 14th Rifle Company, composed of hardened veterans and fresh recruits from across the Soviet Union. Their leader, Sergeant Ivan Petrov, was a man forged by the harsh Siberian winters, his sharp eyes and unyielding discipline making him a feared figure among both comrades and enemies. The unit's mission was clear but deadly: hold key positions in the tundra, delay the German advance, and protect the vital supply routes. But the environment was as much an enemy as the Wehrmacht. Temperatures plummeted to -40°C, frostbite was constant, and blizzards reduced visibility to mere feet. Soldiers learned to camouflage themselves with white paint and snowdrifts, becoming ghosts in the frozen landscape. Petrov's unit excelled in sniper tactics, picking off enemy officers and artillery crews from concealed positions. Private Mikhail Sokolov, a sharpshooter with uncanny patience, recounted the long hours waiting silently in the snow, breathing shallowly to avoid revealing his position. Every shot was a gamble. Being spotted meant certain death. Supplies were scarce. Rations often consisted of frozen bread and powdered soup, and ammunition was carefully conserved. Letters from home, carried by supply planes or mail runners, were treasured lifelines, reminders of warmth and normalcy far away. One such letter, penned by Petrov's wife Anna, spoke of waiting by the window for news and of hope that the war would end soon. The German forces, equipped with superior artillery and tanks, pushed relentlessly. But they underestimated the Soviet defenders' resolve and knowledge of the terrain. Ambushes in narrow ravines, sabotage of supply lines, and sniper attacks slowed the enemy advance to a crawl. The unit's resilience became a symbol of Soviet determination against overwhelming odds. One particularly harrowing episode saw the 14th Rifle Company trapped on a ridge during a fierce snowstorm. Cut off from reinforcements and low on ammo, Petrov made the grim decision to hold their ground rather than retreat and risk exposure. For 3 days, the men endured the storm, sharing body heat and whispering songs to keep morale alive. When relief finally arrived, the ridge remained in Soviet hands, a testament to their endurance. The battle for Murmansk raged on for months. As spring approached and the snow began to thaw, the tide of war shifted. Soviet counterattacks, bolstered by fresh troops and improved supplies, forced the Germans to retreat. The Arctic front, though harsh and forgotten by many, had held firm. In the aftermath, veterans like Petrov returned home changed men. The frozen landscape had left scars both physical and emotional. Many found it difficult to speak of their experiences, the silence a shield against haunting memories of friends lost to cold and bullet alike. Decades later, historians and relatives piece together the story of Operation Frozen Dawn through letters, diaries, and rare photographs recovered from Soviet archives. The campaign's role in the broader war effort was finally acknowledged, highlighting the courage of those who fought in one of the most extreme and unforgiving theaters of World War II. Today, memorials stand in the Arctic Circle, honoring the soldiers who braved ice and fire to hold a lifeline for their nation. Operation Frozen Dawn remains a powerful reminder that in the vast, brutal canvas of World War II, every front mattered, even the coldest and most remote. August 1, 1944. Warsaw's streets, scarred by years of Nazi occupation, ignited with the fierce determination of a people refusing to bow. The Warsaw Uprising, a desperate and heroic attempt by the Polish Home Army to liberate their city before the Soviet Red Army arrived, was underway. Among those caught in the maelstrom was Jadwiga Nowak, a young woman whose diaries would later reveal the heartache, hope, and heartbreak of that brutal summer. Jadwiga was a schoolteacher before the war. Her life appended when German forces invaded Poland in 1939. The occupation brought unimaginable horrors: mass arrests, executions, and the destruction of entire neighborhoods. Yet beneath the rubble, a resilient underground thrived. Jadwiga joined the Home Army, taking on the dangerous role of a liaison and messenger, delivering orders and coordinating between resistance units. Her diary entries, found decades later in a hidden compartment beneath a ruined building, provide an intimate window into the uprising's daily realities. She wrote of early optimism as Polish fighters seized control of key districts, raising their white and red flags defiantly over barricades. Civilians joined the fight, armed with whatever weapons they could find, fueled by a desperate hope for freedom. But the optimism was short-lived. German forces unleashed brutal reprisals, leveling entire city blocks with artillery and flamethrowers. Food and medical supplies dwindled rapidly. Jadwiga's words paint a haunting picture of makeshift hospitals, children orphaned by war, and the constant fear of betrayal. The uprising was not only a battle for Warsaw but a fight for survival against overwhelming odds. What made the uprising even more tragic was the cold reality of geopolitics. The Soviet Red Army, poised just across the Vistula River, did not advance to aid the insurgents. Jadwiga's diary expresses bitter confusion and growing despair as pleas for help went unanswered. The Soviets halted their offensive, allowing the Nazis to crush the uprising with ruthless efficiency. After 63 days, the Home Army was forced to surrender. The city lay in ruins, and its people were scattered, sent to labor camps, hiding in ruins, or fleeing westward. Jadwiga survived but was forever marked by the loss of her family and the betrayal of her homeland's allies. The diaries were discovered by a post-war historian during reconstruction efforts, offering a poignant and personal counterpoint to the grand political narratives of the war. Through Jadwiga's voice, readers grasped the human cost of broken promises, the resilience of spirit, and the complexity of wartime alliances. The Warsaw Uprising remains a defining chapter in Poland's history, a symbol of courage and sacrifice amid betrayal and devastation. Jadwiga's story, though fictional, embodies the countless real lives caught in the crossfire of global conflict and the harsh realities that shaped the post-war world. Her words remind us that behind every battle and treaty are individuals who dared to hope, to fight, and to dream of peace in the darkest of times. The past holds its breath, guarding the shadows where forgotten heroes and untold horrors reside. As this box closes once more, remember, the echoes of these hidden battles still haunt the world, reminders of the fragile line between courage and despair, and the unseen costs paid in silence. Some secrets never fade, they wait, just beneath the surface, for those brave enough to listen.